discussion has been on sexual dysfunction. And we have a psychotherapist and counselor on our program today, Temple Obike. He is the founder and lead counsel for Temple's Counsel. He is a certified life, marriage, family therapist, counselor, author, and keynote speaker, and which focuses on everyday habits, vices, emotions, and other effects that affect individuals, families, marriages, and the nation at large. It's good to have you on our program today. You're welcome, Temple Obike, to Imperial Forum.
Thank you so much for having me on the program, Imelda.
Going through your profile, it seems you have great passion for counseling, because I noticed that you started counseling unofficially in 2004, advising youth groups on drugs and sex abuse. Can you tell us what actually
Yes.
motivated you?
Okay, well, at the time, because I was still in school, and because my parents weren't actually in Lagos and I had to school in Lagos, I was privy to live in a couple of places with a couple of people. And during this particular stage of my life, I was opportune to see the things people went through on a daily basis, which was very different from where I was coming from, and it sort of laid a heavy need on my heart to actually help people out, because I noticed that people were going through quite a bit, and so I decided to do what was within my immediate reach to assist. And coincidentally, it so happened that in school, there was an outreach program called the Grassroots and Shoots Initiative, which is owned by the Jane Goodall Institute. So we joined up and we were able to have a lot of reach to the communities, because we were always carrying out, we had various initiatives we carried out across various locations in Lagos State. So it sort of helped me build the passion even a bit further than what it was. And I believe that was a bulk of what has led me to this point.
Okay. I also saw on your profile that you have empowered over 400 people. And how many years did it take you to achieve that? And how challenging was the process?
Well, 400 people across 4 years, because I've practiced officially for 4 years and unofficially for about 8 years. So cumulatively, we're looking at about 12 years. However, you know how it happens where you kick off something and you know this is what you're passionate about. You know this is what you were put here to do. And I believe this is something that happens when people see some sort of value and pretty much go out there and tell some other person. So it started out in trickles, but after a while, we noticed that the numbers kept on coming in and coming in, and of course, this forced me to start attempting to put some structure to what I did.
Okay.
And I guess the rest is history.
Okay. Let's look at the aspect of family life now, based on sexual dysfunction. How does it affect marriages?
Well, okay, first of all, I think it would be a good thing to start off with what I consider the definition of sexual dysfunction.
Okay.
For me, this is a psychological or physical condition that prevents either you or your partner from achieving maximum sexual satisfaction. And for me, some of the very popular sexual dysfunctions out there, like maybe premature ejaculation, or people who suffer from inhibited sexual desires and all of that. So this has really been, in my own opinion, the reason many marriages, have broken up,
Mm.
And unfortunately, only only 3 out of 10 men would agree that this is one of the causative reasons why their marriages have been affected. And it causes quite a lot of issues within
Okay.
the boundaries of marital life. And some of those issues are things like blame shifting, for instance, where you see a man and his wife, and a man knows there's an issue,
Okay.
but unfortunately does not want to own up to the fact that there's an issue.
Mm.
And you see the back and forth where, it could be from the wife, any other thing, any other reason but themselves.
Oh, you might
And
feel the wife is not
and
attracted enough.
yes, because this what you just said brings me to my very second point, because another vital reason why this causes issues, in marriages is because you notice that a bulk of the African, and let's say 70% of the average African man,
Mm-hmm.
has his self-esteem directly tied into his ability to perform sexually.
Yes.
So when this is threatened, it sort of affects them and affects their, so pretty much a lot of them feel very emasculated. Now, this brings me to another point, which is also important, especially for the women. You find out that women who are in relationships where their husbands struggle with sexual dysfunction, they have a bit of low self-confidence, because at a point you're wondering if indeed this dysfunction has anything to do with the person, or if it has everything to do with the fact that they are no longer attracted to you.
Yeah.
So regardless of how much these men try to explain it away, it's still there at the back of their minds, affecting them. The other thing I think that it causes in marriages is, of course, there's a spike in affairs, obviously, because imagine a woman who has obviously maybe tried as much as possible to see what can be done about this, and it's still not improving. A lot of women have been, they go out, they purchase toys to enhance their sexual life.
Mm.
And if that still doesn't work, you find a lot of women, over the years, I noticed a lot of women now try to curb their natural sexual tendencies, which would be called maybe a libido. They try to curb their libido just to, match up to the man's pace
Mm.
or a lack of it. And even with this, it still doesn't cut it for a bulk of them. And you find out that at the end of the day, most of them, need to look for the satisfaction somewhere else. And unfortunately, this is, I would say, about 35% of the women out there. And of course, this is a very highly conservative estimate. 35% of the women would actually look outwards for this. And lastly, I think divorce, because the divorce rates are spiking, and most times, I wouldn't say it's highly prevalent. It may not be the major reason, but for most of the times that we've seen divorce cases, you find out that this is one of those things nobody mentions. You just find it in divorce filings as irreconcilable differences. They just throw it in there somehow.
Okay. Does sexual history actually affect marital happiness as well?
Well, sadly, yes. Um, but with a caveat, yes, if you allow it, because let's take for instance, a lot of men, especially for, and I believe, because I believe the questions are pertaining mostly to the men, so I will use men as example. A lot
Okay.
of men, for instance, who have had a very, let's put it, quote unquote, rich sexual history,
Mm.
you find out that when you have a very candid discussion with this man, you notice that one of the things they own up to is that every now and then, there are silent comparisons mentally, where you're currently with a woman who you love,
Mm.
and somewhere at in the recesses of your mind, you find out that you're still, when you are intimate with her,
Mm.
a part of you is as much as you try to hold it back, but there's a mental part that tries to strike comparisons between what you were used to and what currently is. And in a situation where you do not handle it carefully and sort of bring the disadvantaged partner up to speed on what you're currently going through, it could actually pose a very big problem in a home. And I can tell you for free that this is a bulk of the problems that many relationships are also facing today. Okay, I remember there was this report I caught up with, from a guy called H. Wolfinger in 2016. He's a professor in the University of Utah, and the research said that that for women who had between 3 to 9 sexual partners pre-marriage, that the bulk of them had the tendencies to not lead their marriages to a divorce. However, it also said that women who had over 10 sexual partners pre-marriage also had a higher tendency to have a divorce. However, in contrast, I've also read.
So?
No, it's funny, because even in contrast now, this is the balance. I've also seen other articles that say that women who have had higher sexual partners or who have experienced, who have a richer sexual history, when they get married, they tend to hold on marriages better, simply because they don't feel the need to stray, because they have every experience they need. So what am I just saying in effect? I personally believe that sexual history can and will affect a marriage if you allow it.
Okay.
So if you don't allow it affect your marriage, you can have your marriage intact, regardless of how rich your sexual history was.
Okay. Because the other partner may not be able to match up with your experience.
Yes. So you teach them. That's why you need to bring them up to speed on what you're going through. It calls for a very candid conversation between partners.
Okay, I see. To what extent can psychological problems damage relationships?
Okay, so for me, first of all, I think, first let's even define what is a psychological problem for starters. A psychological problem is what I would consider, a condition that adversely affects mood, behavior, and thinking. Now, when it comes to psychological problems, it's one of those terrains that I advise should be embarked upon, with a lot of caution, because who is to say what a psychological problem is and what it isn't? Let's take for instance, okay, amazing. Let's take for instance, a woman who washes her hands 30 times a day. Yeah. Off the top of our heads, we can look at her and we're like, this madam has an issue. Why would you be washing your hands for 30 times? But now, post-COVID, her husband in the same house is now washing his hands at least 30 times a day as well. So what happened? Is it that the husband has learned has he sort of imbibed the psychological disorder? Or is it that it was never a psychological disorder? Now, this is what I think. I think when it comes to the issue of psychological disorder, there are two very important things. Sometimes there are things that we would call, there are things that are situational, meaning that people do certain things because of situations they find themselves in. And there are people who do certain things because that is what society sees as extreme. So society labels it. So this brings me to the first point, which is mislabeling of behavior. I see it happen every day with marriages. I see it happen every day with people. Where somebody is coming in for a marriage counseling session, and first of all, they turn up alone for a marriage counseling session. And while they are there, they tell you of all the problems they believe their husband has. or the problems they believe their wife has. And while you're listening, you can almost tell that there's slight mislabeling of behavior here,
Yeah.
because some things don't just. So that's, in my own opinion, that's one of the first major things that we notice with a psychological condition. The second thing I would consider a major problem when it comes to this issue of psychological problems would be what I call the loss of empathy. When people struggle with psychological problems, they seem to lose the ability to be empathic about other people's plights because they are trapped in the prisons of what they are currently going through. Another issue that usually comes up is a loss of intimacy. I've had situations where people battling depression, for instance, discover that they just can't be intimate with their partners because, for two reasons, either because of what they're currently going through, or for those who have been put on medication. You find out that the medication has an adverse effect. Of course, every medication, or well, most medications have adverse effects. So as an adverse effect, you find out that the bulk of these people, when they do take this medication, it impairs their ability to be intimate. So you find the bulk of them opting out of medication, which at this point, I will feel the need to emphasize that if you find out that medication seems to be impairing with your ability, or impairs your ability to be intimate with your spouse, the easiest route is to simply go back to the medical doctor or the prescriber and have a discussion with them so that they can figure out another way around it.
Okay.
Aside from this, I think another problem that I would talk about is isolation. When people are currently faced with
Yeah.
issues, when people face issues, you find out that it sort of isolates them, or they isolate themselves from every other person. And when people isolate themselves, there's a bit of a withdrawal. And this is where you find people who are in marriages and it's almost looking like you're alone, where you hear the balance, married but single.
Yes, married but
Because
single.
you're married. Yeah,
When
you're
you're still
married, but
single.
there's no difference between when you were married and
When you're
when you were
still
single,
single.
because you literally feel alone. So sometimes this is also triggered by isolation. Another thing that I think will be a major concern will be stigma.
Stigma.
People
Okay.
who battle psychological concerns, how society is very unforgiving about certain things, even though people will tell you that, hey, we understand, but sometimes looking at them, you can just tell they don't. So that stigmatization is a big issue that we've noticed in the mental health field, where you find out that due to the stigma, these people cannot even function with their loved ones, let alone function with society.
Yeah.
So I think those are the major prevalent issues that I can
Damages.
actually
Yeah.
cite from this.
Okay.
Yeah.
How do you handle such cases in marriages or long-term relationship in terms of sexual dysfunction or any other psychological problem that individuals encounter? And do you have testimonials on successful cases you have handled?
Well, first of all, when it comes to handling cases of sexual dysfunction, the honest truth is that it is highly client specific, because for starters, a sexual dysfunction is simply an issue that arose because of something that had happened at some point. It could be purely medical. It could be a medical issue, or it could be a psychological issue. Now, I would want to talk about the psychological aspect of it.
Yes.
Now, when it comes to issues of sexual dysfunction, um, first and foremost, before any individual opens up to you, to a large degree, they need to trust you enough. That's the first level. You need to build a trust with the client, and which is where, for of course, a lot of things coming. Things like understanding that it's a very confidential environment for them to be able to open up.
Okay.
And how do you do this? Of course, a part of it is slightly relational when you relate with the client. But another part of it is with the documentations that go into onboarding clients, which will be your client non-disclosure agreements and the likes. After all of this is done, pretty much the next natural stage is identifying and being able to label correctly what the issue is. And once this has been done, the next natural step is understanding what triggers the condition. If it's something that keeps reoccurring, we need to understand what the triggers are. And once we understand what the triggers are, we understand how to start curbing those triggers. You know, and when it comes to the testimonials, like you asked, yes, we've had quite an astounding client success rates, if I say so myself. And I would say we've had over 70 to 72% success rates.
Wow.
Because another thing you also need to put into consideration when it comes to handling clients is this. You cannot want to help the clients more than they want to help themselves.
Okay.
You know, yes.
So that means they have a big role to play.
They have a big role to play, yes.
Okay, so how would you advise couples to cope with issues of this kind? There are some people who love to, who are shy to talk about this. When I went to the street to take some people's views about this, many people didn't want to talk about it, but they want to listen to people talk about it, but they don't want to express themselves to say the problems that they face.
Okay. When you recognize there's a problem, the next natural step is to seek for a solution. You know, but living in denial when you know there's an existing problem, that is where people allow things linger for too long and it breaks down, it could break down a marriage. But when you actively try to curb these problems, it becomes your first step to success. And there are a lot of ways you can curb this issue of sexual dysfunction. And especially since we're talking about men, you know, I think for the guys out there, I think the first thing we need to understand is that exercise is very key. It's important. I think the men out there need to exercise a bit more. And, you know, when we talk about exercise, you know, there are a lot of people start imagining rigorous activities. You know, it could be as simple as a 30-minute walk every day.
Yeah.
You just get up, maybe in the evenings, take a walk, just a 30-minute walk. That's all. Aside from that, I think we also need to watch our eating habits. You know, stick to healthy foods, the vegetables, the fruits, you know, fish, you know, cereals, if possible, for your fiber. And, you know, just ensure that you stick to a healthy diet, especially once you start approaching a certain age bracket. You know, and for me, I would give that age bracket for men between 40 years. Once you start approaching that 35-40 bracket, you need to be extremely careful with what you eat. The other thing is, I would also advise that men, the size does matter. And of course, size now, I'm talking about their weight. You know, you need to constantly keep an eye out for your weight because let's say someone with a size, with a 42-inch waist is 50% more prone to sexual dysfunction than someone with the size 32-inch waist. You know, because the bulkier you are, the more prone you are to these things, and you need to ensure. It's there's a direct relationship with weight and, you know, sexual dysfunction, and it's something I believe people need to actively watch out for. But another thing I think will be important as well is vascular health. People need to pay a lot of attention to their vascular health because things like low blood sugar, high blood sugar, high cholesterol levels, high blood pressure, these things damage arteries. And when your arteries are damaged, you find out that it affects or it impairs blood flow in the system. The moment your blood flow is affected, it's one of the major causative issues or causative agents rather for sexual dysfunction. Because what actually gets you hard during intercourse is actually the ability of blood to flow your capillaries, your vessels, and stay
Okay.
there. So the better your circulatory system, the higher the chances that if there's a prevalent issue or there's an existing issue with sexual dysfunction, that you may actually come out of it.
Okay. Wow.
So I think those are pretty much the reasons.
Yeah, thank you so much. You really said so much today, and I've also learned from you today. You mentioned some areas that people need to take note
Well,
of.
I'm glad you could learn quite a bit from this, and
Yeah.
yeah, and thank you again for having me on. It's something we appreciate out here because I believe a lot of people still need to hear and understand a lot more about
And how
mental
to
health
handle this
and how.
maturely, you know. All right, I appreciate your time with us. Thank you so much. Temple Obike is a psychotherapist and a counselor. He's also the lead counsel and founder of Temple's Counsel. I appreciate your time with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Imelda. Thanks for having me on.